Today, we're going to go over the top decks in Pioneer to prepare you for your upcoming events this weekend. Just like last week, be sure to check the description down below for any FMN Tier decks. If a deck isn't specifically mentioned, assume it is FMN Tier, as they can certainly do well at your local store, but if your goal is to win an RCQ, play in the challenges, etc., you're going to want to aim a little higher. First up, we're going to start with D Tier, just a lone deck this week, just below sort of the line where I think you might want to be considering for even RCQs or local events. That's going to be Bant Humans. I think the Humans decks have done a great job of developing with mono white humans, but the added colors aren't giving you as much as they were before, as mono white being able to use Brave the Elements and have just as good of disruption tools as Bant makes it so that they're a more consistent low to the ground aggro deck, whereas Bant is a little clunkier and still has problems finishing the game through blockers. Next up, we're going to go to the S tier, jump right to the top so we can sort of get our idea, the lay of the land of the rest of the meta and how it shakes down. First up, we have blue-white control. The big thing for blue-white control this weekend was we saw a resurgence of it in the challenges, putting up 4 top 8s, including a win, which is a very strong performance, outpacing any other singular deck. But where we've seen blue-white control really pick up some ground is that it is able to attack a lot of the other A tier decks without losing many percentages to the rest of the field. The only decks that it does consistently struggle with are going to be your close matches against red-black mid-range, especially the 60 card version I think is worse into red-black than the 80 card, whereas the 60 card version gives you a little bit more game against some of the more linear decks. Even if it doesn't fix those matchups, it does make them a little bit closer. I think overall, blue-white control gives you a lot of game against most of the format, even if you are still trying to dodge mono-green Karn. Next up in A tier, these are the decks outside of blue-white control put up good finishes this weekend, along with lining up well against many of the decks in the format. First up, we have Mono Green Karn. I won an RCQ this last weekend with Mono Green Karn. The deck still operates at a very high level when undisrupted or with your best draws. Being able to play things like turn 3 Storm the Festival into a combo finish gives you a way around decks that are able to gain a lot of life or stabilize the board. You are still in a position where blue-white control can be tough if they have the right answers, but you are generally favored, whereas against Heroic and Blue-Red Phoenix, it's very difficult, and against red-black mid-range, you're happy to sit across from them, but some of their more disruptive, heavy, and aggressive starts can still beat you. You still have the same matchup spreads as usual, wanting to dodge things like Bant Spirits and Mono Blue Spirits, but Mono Green Karn at its peak, especially with the addition of Nicol Bolas, is starting to creep back up into the top finishes, putting up the most finishes between the challenges and the prelims this weekend. Next up, we have Boris Heroic, a deck that seems to come and go, but generally needs 1 or 2 strong matchups to find itself in the higher tiers. Here, being able to attack Mono Green Karn, as well as being able to beat any of the more non-interactive slower decks, even potentially getting through something like the various interactive decks with some key sideboarding. Even though I'd still say Phoenix and red-black mid-range are happy to sit across from Heroic, it can still steal games with some level of reliability, especially if you're able to board in the cards that are hard to remove, like Adanto Vanguard, or your higher end cards like Showdown of the Scalds. Next up, we have Is It Phoenix? This deck continues to float around the high A tier, given that it has a lot of flexibility. The printing of Ledger Shredder alongside Thing in the Ice, Young Pyromancer, and Phoenix give you a variety of threats. You still have the best delve spells in the format, and you have plenty of removal to target some of the creature heavy decks without losing too much percentage against the more controlling side of the format. Last up, we have Rectus Mid-Range. Again, this is a deck that continues to show up in droves. People have been adjusting to it. With the resurgence of Mono Green Karn, it does get a little tougher, but I think red-black mid-range is continually a deck that is able to pick and choose where it wins and loses percentage points and is the de facto best mid-range deck in the format. The only problems it suffers from is decks going well over the top of it and and right now, blue-white control can potentially, mostly with the 80 card, not the 60 card version, or mono-green Karn can go over the top of you alongside Treasure Cruise from Blue-Red Phoenix. But like most Jund-esque style decks of old Modern formats, you are pretty level against the field, and skilled pilots will be able to pull those percentages into favorable matchups. Next up, we have the B tier. These are the decks that still put up strong finishes, sometimes including top 8s or even winning challenges, but overall, their place in the metagame sits just a little bit below the top tiers, mainly due to specific matchups among those higher tiers. First up, let's start with Bant Spirits. This is a deck that gets a lot of percentage points by being able to attack mono green Karn as well as Lotus Field and blue-white control. Any deck with mana value 3 or greater spells in its deck, with the exception of red-black mid-range for the most part, you're happy to sit across from as you tempo them out, tap down their creatures with Shacklegeist, and protect your own creatures. We saw Bant Spirits starting to have more success than mono blue spirits, probably due to having access to a few better tools, especially against some of these removal heavy decks. Being able to splash into Coco gives you a better catch-up mechanic, and people are starting to figure out between blue-red Phoenix and red-black mid-range that it is difficult for spirits to exist in just the mono blue fashion that really preyed upon the more mid-range over the top decks. With the advent of lower curves from Phoenix and red-black mid-range with so much removal, it does become tough to just stay mono blue. Next up, we have Abzan Greasefang. This deck has been picking up more and more play recently. It does tend to rely almost entirely on the combo of Parhelion and Greasefang Okiba Boss, but when you're able to get that combo going, it's very difficult to interact with, and the Abzan version plays plenty of ways to protect your graveyard. It still remains a difficult matchup if you're playing against mono green Karn and they're able to rush out a Karn into a Tormod's Crypt or just keep your artifacts from being able to be crewed, but a lot of the other top matchups in the metagame are close and you're able to weave and bob your way through them, and people have been finding quite a bit of success with this deck of late. Last up in B tier, we have mono white humans. As mentioned, Brave the Elements, the string of strong creatures with the addition of Wedding Announcement into the deck to give you a little bit more main deck longevity, along with being able to attack the various mid-range decks. The fact that a lot of the top decks in the format leverage one color of mana for their removal, either red or black, or are things like mono green or mono blue, so you're able to go right through them with Brave the Elements, gives you a lot of game against the various decks in the format, along with having access to hate bear pieces like Thalia, Guardian of Thraben, that can shut down controls early turns. Last up, we have the C tier. These are kind of those gatekeepers between the upper echelons, the decks that are able to finish more consistently in the top 8, top 16, and the lower tier decks that sort of sit towards the bottom. These are going to show up a lot in your local events, your RCQs potentially, also in prelims. They will show up in challenges, so you need to know about them, but they aren't your top contender. First up, we have Jund Sacrifice. This is a deck that continues to leverage the power of Mayhem Devil, Cat Oven combo, as well as Korvold, a very large threat that most decks have a hard time answering, especially if you prepare a sacrifice fodder so that you can get it to a 6/6. A lot of decks will pretty instantly fold to a flying 6/6 that grows and draws you cards each turn. Leveraging the power of Mayhem Devil as well to shoot down small creatures, you have access to lots of different tools to help shape the matchups post board. Next up, we have Mono Red, which has started to diverge into the more traditional Mono Red, the spectacle cards, the Burn, Chandra Dress to Kill, and the Cleave version using Annex alongside Ember Cleave and Torbrand to be able to be a bit more explosive and get through decks like mono green. We've seen mono red start to struggle as mono green has been able to make that matchup feel better, alongside the fact that blue red Phoenix and red black mid-range are top decks, making it tough to grind through those matchups that can potentially keep your creatures in check, especially for the Ember Cleave version. Last up, we have mono blue Spirits. The deck that was the standout Spirits deck for the longest time has now started to fall a little bit to Bant, just due to the nature that your matchups against mono green Karn and blue-white control remain good, but other top decks in the format are still able to interact very cheaply at mana equal or advantage against your creatures, leaving you without any catch-up mechanics and falling behind. If we saw the drop-off of some of the more mid-range decks like red-black or blue-red, I think you could see mono-blue start to rise up even higher, but with an increasing amount of decks at the top of the table that can answer your spirits for cheap, especially with things like Rending Volley. It does become difficult for Mono Blue Spirits to sit any higher than C tier. So that does it for this week. Be sure to like and subscribe if you've been enjoying these videos. Leave a comment down below if you've been playing your local RCQ events or if you plan to in the future, and let me know which of you have punched your tickets to the regional championships later this year. I'll see you there. Until next time.